Okay, so it's 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, December 16th, 2025, and Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua is soon to be upon us. So now I haven't really given any like mental real estate to Jake Paul's boxing career at all until this fight was announced, and it's because it's just such an egregious mismatch on like every level that I was just like baffled about how the fight even came to be. So I've been thinking a lot about like just like like why, and I couldn't think of any like real reason that this fight would happen aside from like money. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and it finally came to me today. I think I figured it out. It's important to look, I think, for this at the careers so far of both Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua and the stories of their careers so far. When you look at Jake Paul's career, it's widely believed that most, if not all, of his fights are rigged, which I don't believe at all. Because if you look at his fights, right, like his first fight, he fought a YouTuber who had never boxed before and he won. Okay, and then he fought Nate Robinson, a retired basketball player who had never boxed before, and he won. He fought Ben Askren, a retired MMA fighter who never boxed before, and he won. Then he fought Tyron Woodley twice. Um, Again, retired MMA fighter who had never boxed before, he won. And then Anderson Silva, another retired MMA fighter who had boxed a few times, but not really against anyone. And so Jake Paul won again. And so this really, like, the Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva fights, this is when really, like, the Jake Paul's rigging all his fights started coming around. But, like, I don't really understand that because he hadn't fought anyone who boxed before, so I don't see why he would have to rig those fights to win them, considering he had been boxing for a few years. But whatever. So then he fights Tommy Fury, and then he loses to Tommy Fury. So, but people still think his fights are rigged, even though the first time he fights against a real boxer, he loses. So I don't really get that. And then he goes on another run where he fights Nate Diaz, another retired MMA fighter who had never boxed before. He wins that. People say that's rigged. Then he fights two more journeymen. He wins both of those. Fights Michael Perry, another retired MMA fighter who had never boxed before. Or, sorry, he boxed once and lost the first time he boxed. So he boxes the second time. Then Jake Paul wins again. People are still saying it's rigged, even though, again, like, I don't see why he would have to rig any of these fights to win because he's not fighting boxers, right? So then Mike Tyson. Now, Mike Tyson's an interesting one because Mike Tyson's a boxer who no one can really. There's a lot of dissent among boxing fans about how good Mike Tyson actually was. I think this is because, like, he's so famous. So you have, like, a lot of casuals who will say he's the best heavyweight boxer of all time because he's like the only name they know. You know, they don't know who people like Sonny Liston are, or Joe Louis, or Lennox Lewis, or you know, Joe Frazier. They don't know who these guys are, so they're like, oh, heavyweight boxer Mike Tyson. So then I think the casuals will say that, and then you'll have the diehard fans who will have like a reaction to that, and then that will cause them to severely underrate Mike Tyson. Regardless of where you want to put his entire career among, you know, the all-time heavyweights, I don't think it should be controversial to say that in his prime, he was the most destructive boxer of all time. He's fighting world-class fighters and just destroying them, you know, just knocking them out in the first half of the fight. Look, Marvis Frazier was a contender in his own right, first round knockout. Trevor Berbick, you know, for the heavyweight champion, second round knockout. Pinklin Thomas, sixth round knockout. Larry Holmes, granted Larry Holmes was past his prime, but still a very good boxer, fourth round knockout. Michael Spinks, first round knockout. You know, this guy, he's just destroying everyone he fights. So I don't think you can discount how amazing his prime was, but it was a very short-lived prime. Because of his fighting style, it required him to be faster, stronger, more vicious, more fearless than whoever he was fighting. You know, he was overwhelming, he would swarm them. And that, as he got older, he started to lose that. You could see it, you know, he lost to Buster Douglas, and then he had a few more fights that he won, but then he went to jail, right? And as soon as he came out of jail, he never looked as good as he did before. And then as he got older, he just looked like worse and worse. Even though he was winning fights, he wasn't winning as demonstratively as he was before. And then he started losing. He lost to Evander Holyfield twice, lost to Lennox Lewis. And then his last two fights, you know, he's fighting Danny Williams, who's essentially a journeyman. He loses. And then he fights Kevin McBride, and who again is a journeyman, and he looks terrible and gets knocked out and then retires on the spot. And that was in 2005, right? So that was 14 years before he fought Jake Paul. He already looked completely out of the game 14 years before the Jake Paul fight. And he had spent the last 14 years just eating shrooms and doing nothing. Despite all this, people still thought Mike Tyson was going to knock out Jake Paul in like the first or second round, and that any other outcome was a fix. Like, come on. What are we talking about here? Like, and then they watched the fight and they still thought it was rigged. Like, Mike Tyson was on shaky legs before the fight even started. Walking to the ring, he looked like he didn't want to be there. Like, I don't think the fix... I know the fix was not in on this fight. Like, that was a legit fight. I think, in fact, Jake Paul could have knocked out Mike Tyson, but didn't want to because he realized during the fight he's fighting a 60-year-old man, almost 60-year-old man, and didn't want to knock out a fucking senior citizen. So, yeah, but people still to this day say it was rigged. And then he fought the shell of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Another fight people say is rigged still. I don't get it, man. I don't think any fight that Jake Paul has been in has been rigged. I just think that he's always picked opponents where he knew that he either would win or had a very good chance of winning. Up until this point. So then if you look at Anthony Joshua's career, you know, he was an Olympian, he goes pro, he's just knocking everyone out that he fights, he looks amazing, he becomes the IBF World Heavyweight Champion, and then unifies it with the IBO against Vladimir Klitschko, knocks him out in the 11th round. This is where Anthony Joshua really made a name for himself, becomes a 3-belt champion. And then the Andy Ruiz fight happens. I'm sure everyone knows the story with the Andy Ruiz fight, but if you don't know it, essentially Anthony Joshua's on top of the world right now. He's still a 3-belt champion, set to make his American debut at Madison Square Garden against a guy named Gerald Miller. But like a few weeks before the fight, Gerald Miller fails like 9 drug tests. So they bring in Andy Ruiz as a last-minute replacement. No one knew who the fuck this guy was. So everyone thought, like, Joshua was just going to make quick work of him, destroy him, you know, hold on to the title. When the fight night comes, Andy Ruiz shocks the world, knocks out Anthony Joshua. And I see a lot of people now saying that this fight, like, broke Anthony Joshua mentally, and that he never recovered from this, but like I think that's recency bias because the next fight was a rematch against Andy Ruiz, and Joshua looked like really good. Like he came in, he looked more humble, he lost weight, he didn't have all those big like glamour muscles anymore. He went back to his fundamentals. You know, he looked like great. I think him losing that fight was actually a good thing for him as a boxer. So he does that. He wins the rematch against Andy Ruiz, gets his belts back, defends it against Pulev, and then Alexander Usyk shows up. Usyk beats him twice, and after the second fight, Anthony Joshua has a televised mental breakdown. You could watch it on YouTube. It's kind of upsetting. It's kind of hard to watch. But there is a moment in that that's pretty important for this. There's a moment where Usyk, trying to make Joshua feel better, and he says like, "You're very strong," and then Anthony Joshua says something to the effect of like, "I don't care about being strong, bro. I need skills. You're not strong, but you beat me. How did you do that? Because you have skills. I need skills." He says like something like that, and then goes on a bunch of other tangents. And then, so after that happens, Joshua has 3 like non-event fights against Jermaine Franklin, Robert Helenius, and Otto Wallen. And after one of these fights, I don't remember which one, but he does like another weird post-fight interview where he says something about like, "I used to be good. Remember when I was good, and then I wasn't good, but now I'm good again." It's like, okay, man. And then he fights Francis Ngannou, who again is an MMA fighter, not a boxer. He boxed once against Tyson Fury and lost. But he fights Francis Ngannou, knocks him out in the second round, and then after that fight, he starts talking about how he wants to be on the road to be a champion again. Like he wants to, be a 3-time champion, and this is, a step on the way, and that's like what he's looking for. He wants the winner of Usyk Fury, he says, and that, he's all in again. And then he gets knocked out by Daniel Dubois. And I think that all goes away. That brings us to today. I think that this is Anthony Joshua's last fight. I think he's done with boxing because I think what's essentially happening with him is that he has this huge ego in terms of himself as a personality and as a character. But I think he's very insecure about his ability as a boxer. So I think he's looking at the current heavyweight landscape, and he's seeing the names that he thinks are worth his time to fight, he doesn't believe he can beat, which puts him in a really weird position. So I think he's just taking this Jake Paul fight as his last fight so he could get a guaranteed win. He could show everyone how good he is as a boxer. He could show everyone that he's not the big stiff bodybuilder. He could show he has skills. He's not just strong, he has skills. And then he could retire, take the paycheck, and live the rest of his days. So I think this is, if that's actually the case, these are my assertions, but if that's actually the case with Anthony Joshua and his, mental state right now, I think this is a good fight for him to take. The real question is, why the fuck would Jake Paul take this fight? Like, what does Jake Paul have to gain from this? Because it's either one of two things happens. He either gets knocked out brutally, or he wins by some miracle, or at the very least survives the fight and makes 8 rounds, and then everyone's just gonna say it was rigged. People are saying it was rigged when he fought a 58-year-old Mike Tyson. People are saying that it's rigged when he fought people who never boxed before. Like, what are they gonna say if he does anything good against Anthony Joshua? It's a lose-lose for him. He either gets destroyed physically, or he solidifies the notion that everyone already has that all of his fights are rigged. So then why, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why he would possibly want this fight, why it's like a good thing. And I also get that, like, Jake Paul probably thinks he's a much better boxer than he actually is, but I still have a very hard time believing that he thinks he's good enough to fight Anthony Joshua. I think that level of delusion is too far, even for Jake Paul. So yeah, so that's really what I've been thinking about for these past few weeks. And it came to me today that there's a third player in this who we're all forgetting about. Jake Paul has a brother named Logan Paul, who's a professional wrestler in the WWE, who also happens to be very good at selling knockouts. Hear me out. What if this fight is rigged, but it's rigged for Jake Paul to lose, right? This whole time, Jake has been working with Logan to get very good at selling knockouts and making knockouts look believable. So the script, right, is that they go in there, Paul and Joshua go in there, they spar for 6-7 rounds, nothing crazy, no one trying to hurt each other, and then Jake takes the fall and he makes it look good, right? And then both of them come out on top because now Anthony Joshua can retire as the hero who finally knocked out Jake Paul, who brought dignity back to boxing, and Jake Paul can say, look, not only can I hang with the best of the best, but I'm also not rigging my fights, because why would I rig a fight for me to get knocked out? I know it sounds like crazy and it sounds like I'm joking, but this is the only scenario that I think actually makes any sense. And it makes a lot of sense, I think. So, yeah. If I go missing, it means that Eddie Hearns got to me, but that also means I was correct.
As I said, I was studying Ukraine and all the champions that have come from your amazing country, but I've never been there. But at the same time, what's happening there is, I don't know what's happening, but it's not nice at the end of the day.